So we wanted to make a video to talk about our review of the Natchez Trace, right?
Yep.
Kind of our thoughts after taking the tour. What did we learn? What would we do differently? What did we change on the way or after the fact?
Yeah, midstream,
that kind of stuff. So I guess we should just start off with the first thing that everybody always talks about, which is weather. Yeah. We were planning this trip. It was, the first week of April, roughly. And we were looking at the weather, and it was kind of like, do we go? Do we not go? You're in the spring in the U.S., and when you're in the spring in the U.S., you never know what the weather's going to be. So finally, I guess what I came to was, what I learned out of the whole deal is sometimes you just got to go. Mm-hmm. Because you're going to have good days, bad days, days that are going to be colder, warmer. Rain is always in the forecast in the spring in the U.S. So
even the southern half is where we were.
Yeah, we were on the south end of the Natchez, so we started in Jackson, Mississippi. We were going towards Natchez, and then we turned around and came back. So what did you think when it came to like weather? What did you learn, I guess, if anything?
It was a little colder than I anticipated, and I maybe shouldn't have been surprised. Thunderstorms, again, it's spring in the kind of the central band of the United States, so it shouldn't be surprising, but I guess I was a little surprised that we didn't have very long windows between passing of storms coming through. 1 or 2 days for the most part.
Yeah.
So
I guess the thing that also we figured out is that we had a couple of times where there was some severe stuff. On the way down there was literally a severe thunderstorm coming with possible tornadoes and stuff, and we just literally skated into the hotel in Jackson and pulled up under the awning, and it started to pour. The storm came through, so we just sort of ducked under that storm. But on the ride down, we were looking at the weather, and that's one of the great things about being in an area where you have access to cell phone service and all that stuff, was that you could get weather information at your fingertips. So we got weather information that said, hey, there's going to be another line of these potentially severe thunderstorms coming through. And then we made the decision to see if we could book a room in Natchez. We were going to be going into Natchez, so we booked a room in Natchez. And I guess if there's something that you learn, it's that don't be afraid to sort of change it up, to grab a room somewhere if you know there's going to be some severe weather, because you never know what's going to be coming.
Well, that's the beauty of this type of trip too. You know, if you've made arrangements to rent a place for a week, or you really had to do much planning in advance with not a lot of leeway, you're kind of stuck. And so we even late in the planning process decided which part of the trail to go on. Right? We could have gone up to Nashville. We could have gone all the way down.
Good point. We actually were originally talking about leaving from the Nashville area, but we actually made the decision to go farther south because we were hoping for warmer weather, because it's been a kind of a cold spring. Mm-hmm. So we even adjusted on the fly, and that is true. We didn't have any hard and fast reservations. I think that's one of the beauties of bike touring in general, is that you can kind of shift it up if you don't have to make actual reservations. So that's a good point too.
You mentioned sometimes you just have to go. At some point you got to just say, I'm gonna draw a line in the sand, and I'm just gonna go. And what you find then is, I think after you do it once, it takes away what at least I have a lot of anxiety about, planning where I'm going to sleep tonight. and if you're bike touring, it takes a little bit of that away, because you already know your options are somewhat limited when you're there, when you're bicycling and you've left your car behind. So you think, well, it doesn't matter as long as you have some stuff with you. It doesn't matter. It takes that anxiety away a little bit, ironically.
Yeah, but there is an interesting feeling that comes with being hundreds of miles or 100 miles away from your vehicle. So a perfect example, when we got to Natchez and we got a hotel room, we figured out that coming up on the next day or two was going to be some really cold weather. Colder than we were prepared for. 35 to 37 degree night.
And wet.
Rain, and we had tents, but we didn't really have sleeping bags that were appropriate for that
temperature.
So we were prepared for 45 degrees probably, excuse me, we were prepared for 45 degrees probably, but not really 35 degrees. And 10 degrees, that's a huge difference. That's one thing you learn too. You may think 10 degrees is not a big deal. 10 degrees is a big deal in temperature.
When you're not active, you're trying to sleep.
Yeah.
You're on the ground.
Yes.
And you've got, maybe if you're lucky, a couple inches between you and the ground on your sleeping pad.
Totally.
Yeah.
So we made this decision that we were going to try to go find some bag liners for our sleeping bags. So if you're not familiar with those, the bag liners are good because you can usually gain anywhere from 10 to 15 degrees of additional thermal properties of your bag by having a liner. But here we are on bicycles. And the only place in Natchez, Mississippi that we thought might have it would be Walmart, because we knew, I had seen at Walmart they do have bag liners sometimes. And we needed to resupply on food too, and we'll talk about food in a minute. But we had to get to Walmart, which was like 4 or 5 miles away, and it was raining that day. The day we're at the hotel's the day it's pouring down rain. So we wound up looking to see, was there an Uber? And there wasn't. And so we just wound up having to call a local taxi cab company and get a ride from the local taxi. And we had this guy that drove us over there, which actually wound up being kind of a cool story too.
Yeah.
This local guy who was a veteran and had quite a story to share when we finally got him warmed up to talk to us, which was actually on the way back. But we did go to Walmart. We did find sleeping bag liners, cheap ones, Ozark Trail, like $6. We didn't care at that point. You just want something that's going to make it a little bit warmer. We did have a lot of layers.
Yeah.
As far as we had thermal types, gear, although, how did you feel like your clothing planning was?
I was underprepared for the cold.
I felt the same way. I felt like I was underprepared for that cold.
I didn't have a suitable hat to sleep in. So Walmart found an effeminate, artificially lined hat that was on sale and turned out to be 38 cents at checkout.
Ridiculously cheap. But at the point, like you really don't care when you're cold or you have the potential of being cold. You're going to do whatever it takes.
Yeah. So think about that hat, though. This is where gear comes into play, because if you have a cap that's suitable for both, going under your helmet or sleeping in it, but it's of a material that handles sweat better. This was basically a cosmetic hat that was just keeping me warm until it got wet.
Yeah.
So it was only useful for limited things.
So then let's talk about food, because one of the things we did also at Walmart was resupply up on our food. Here's the fact. We had plenty of food. We never ran out of food completely or anything like that. So it wasn't like we were going to starve. But we did have some greater struggles than we planned with the Trace in general and how towns are structured, where they're at with relationship to the Trace, and then how we would get there. And that sort of changed at least my philosophy or my thoughts about the food situation. Because one of the things you always hear when you're watching videos or you're reading out there is people will always say, oh, you can find food along your travels. Well, that's somewhat true, but on the Trace, I think it's a little different because it's sort of isolated, or I felt like it was.
And it's deceiving because it's this nice, beautiful paved pathway. Bikes have the right of way, and you think this is great, and it is. But when you go to get off of the Trace to go find some food, it's anywhere between 10 and 15 miles. It'd be nice to have seen Vicksburg, but it was 15 miles one way.
Yeah.
If you're biking 50 miles to your destination, adding 5, 10, 15, 30 makes a big difference. So you're not going to...
We did stop, if any of you guys watch the videos, you know that we did stop at a little town that was only like a couple of miles off the Trace, but that was one of the few. I mean, obviously when you get to the end of the Trace, you can ride into Natchez, and that's a couple miles too off of the Trace to get into Natchez. But most of those towns were a little bit farther than that, 5 miles or more. Yeah. And sometimes there were no towns.
Yeah, right.
In places. So between Jackson and Port Gibson, there really wasn't much off of the road without going a fairly significant distance. And so we had to use our food supplies when we camped a couple times. We were in some places that didn't have. One of the campgrounds was, more rustic and didn't have power or hookups. All of the places we stayed, we wound up not having to pay, which was interesting. One of them was free. The other was not. But here's another interesting thing. The office was like, we even tried to find the office at one point. Miles, it seemed like, from the entrance of the campground. And finally, I talked to one of the park guys, and he was just like, don't worry about it.
Yeah, it was going to rain any minute.
Yeah, we were like, hey, it's going to rain in 30 minutes. We're looking at the radar. We have cell phone service. We're looking at the radar. It's going to rain in 30 minutes, and I'm not going to make it down to the office. And he's like, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
So the park guys were really friendly. I will say that state park, that Mississippi State Park, was pretty nice.
Yeah. Good facilities.
And then the Rocky Springs campground, super nice.
Yep.
Had bathrooms and running water, although on the second time we stayed at that campground, the water looked pretty sketchy.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
It was murky and I don't know. And so we didn't take any risks. We actually wound up boiling the water, but it made us think more about gear. So I want to talk about that a little bit too. We talked about the sleeping bag liners. We sort of had plenty of food, but did it change your perspective on what you would pack for food?
Yeah, it did. It did. I would have packed more energy bars, more nuts and dried fruits to just to eat on the fly, because I did think that was my weakness. And I've talked to one of our friends who's a dietitian since that trip, and she confirmed what I thought I had discovered. And we talked about is that every hour you've got to make up a deficit. You got to think of calories, you got to think of fluid, you got to think of electrolytes in some situations. I sweat a lot, but not on this trip. It was cold. But I would be a little more vigilant this time around with those three things.
So we were averaging on most days we were riding anywhere from 40 to 50 miles. There were a couple days there which were shorter, like 15-mile days or 16-mile days or whatever. But on those days where we were riding 40 to 50 miles, what we kind of figured out, which was completely logical when you really sat down and think about it, but if you've not done this kind of stuff and you don't have the experience, you don't realize. But what we realized was that you need to be, in essence, you're burning, for guys our age and size anyway, you're burning about 500 calories.
With all the gear too.
Per hour. With the gear that we're carrying, the weight that we have and all that stuff, you're probably burning about 500 calories an hour. So when you think about that, with the average energy bar being somewhere between, let's just say 250 calories on average, you're eating 2 of those an hour.
Yeah, it should be.
Or you should be.
And sometimes you don't feel like it.
To keep up that deficit you're burning off. But that's the thing, when you're riding, oftentimes you don't get hungry. You don't feel hungry. Sometimes you don't feel thirsty. All those things, but you really need to force yourself to say, okay, I've gone 5 miles, because we average about 10 miles an hour on average with all that gear and the terrain we were on. Paved, it was nice. But even on the Katy Trail where we ride all the time, we average somewhere around 10, depending on what we're doing.
Well, and some of us, myself included, if you're doing that kind of activity, you get some GI upset sometimes, and so you're not going to want to eat.
Yeah.
Runners talk about that all the time. Even the goo upsets their stomach. Even Gatorade upsets some people's stomachs. So you just have to keep that in mind.
Right.
And I don't know. We ended up deciding we should probably stop about once an hour to just get off the bike, walk a little bit, stretch, grab a bite, have some water.
Yeah. So when pedaling, trying to eat about every half hour and take in a couple hundred calories is the only way you can keep up. Because what you find is, even if you don't eat, and we did this one day, you go to McDonald's, because that was the only one of the only things in town, and you eat this 1,000-calorie meal because you're thinking, I can eat all this because I want to catch up. But the problem is, then you feel terrible.
Yeah.
You're just full, you're bloated, your body's like going overtime, digesting all this food, and you just get on the bike and you're like...
Yeah, feel like you've been to the trough.
So at least I found by the last day, which is the way this always is, you always start figuring things out by the time you're at the last day of your trip, at least for the short tours we do. You become somewhat envious of you guys who actually can go out and ride for extended periods of time, because you figure this out and then you get in the rhythm. About the time we figure it out, it's over. So what we figured out though is that by the last day, when it was able to eat like a little more frequently, be a little more vigilant, and kind of know, okay, we need to be drinking, we need electrolytes, we should be taking in about this many liters of water. You know, we started kind of figuring it out and felt we began to figure out the nutrition part. The problem then was that our bodies were getting tired though by that last day. And I think you even said that the last day was the hardest day for you.
It was for me. Yeah, it really was. Yeah. Knees were hurting, just kind of out of gas.
So one of the things we talked about was that one of the topics was that for, at least for me, and I think you said the same thing, was that it wasn't as much about the pedaling aspect of it. Yeah, the knees and the muscles were getting tired or sore or whatever. But really, for me, it was just the saddle time.
Yeah.
By the end of 50 miles, your butt's tired from sitting in the saddle for us, because we don't ride all the time.
Yeah.
You know, 5 hours of saddle time for us was about our limit, which worked out because that's about what our bodies could do, and it was about the distance we needed to make anyway.
Yeah.
In a day, roughly, on what we had planned.
Now, some of the people that are really doing road cycling down there, supported rides, they might go further, you know, too. People that are probably conditioned differently too. Now, some of them are going about the same distance. We saw some people going about 50 miles, but I'm sure some of those folks will go about 100 miles because the trail is 440 something miles.
Right.
So some people will really do the whole thing.
But they're on ultralight bikes. They're not carrying all the gear that we were carrying. They were supported, and that just makes a huge difference.
I think so.
And they're on true road bikes. We're riding more of a touring setup with more of a touring tire and all those things. So I think that makes a difference too.
Yeah. Well, and probably not worried as much about timing. If you know your tent's going to be delivered and sort of campsite might be at least chosen, I don't know. They probably each outfit does it differently.
So overall, I mean, that's kind of like the summary of what we thought of the trace. As far as the trace itself, the trace was beautiful.
Yeah.
There wasn't the fact that there's not towns along the trace, physically along the trace itself, I think detracted from it, because that's one of the things I enjoy is sort of the little local places we've been before. It was cool to see the little towns and the little town squares and eat at the cafes and all that kind of stuff. We sort of missed out on a little bit of that. I felt like it was a lot of grass and trees and pavement, and that was okay.
Yeah,
if that's
historical markers.
A lot of historical markers. And if that's your thing, this is definitely a ride you should do. If you're looking for more of the interaction, though, with people and locals and towns and stuff like that, local culture, the Trace is not going to give you that. But beautiful, beautiful highway, beautiful country, rolling hills mostly, you know, sort of up and down rolling hills, and beautiful blacktop. I mean,
it was nice surface.
Surface was just really pristine. There was only a few places that had any roughness to it at all. You know, a few places where there were little bumps in the road, but overall it was super smooth.
Well, might be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about the safety, because I think the motorist really did recognize the right of way of the cyclist. Only once or twice did someone get kind of close to us and make me uncomfortable. One was a big RV pulling a trailer and got uncomfortably close.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that, you know,
that was it, though. We really didn't have any other issues. Like, motorists were really friendly. They really did give cyclists a lot of right of way and space usually, and it was very friendly for that.
Yeah.
Well, so what did you change, or what would you change after coming back? Did you evaluate sort of what you would do differently?
Yeah. Well, some of it is just my bike setup. I definitely, in fact, since then I've already gotten different pedals. Because I had pedals that were small, sort of footprint, flat on one side, and you flip them over, able to clip in with clip-on shoes that I don't really wear right now. I've sort of given that up for the most part, so I got some of the flat Chester race faces that you use. So I really like those. I've ridden a couple times on those. I like that a lot. I've actually, I don't know, I would probably look at my distribution of my gear and things. If I'm going to continue to use those front racks, maybe a larger pannier would be good.
Yeah.
That perhaps. Food. And then, like we talked about, the temperature appropriate gear, sleeping bags, whatnot.
Gear distribution.
Yeah.
What do you mean by like gear distribution?
Well,
Explain that a little bit.
Well, you know, I think of that old Aesop's fable where one guy volunteered to carry the big bag knowing that it had food and it was going to get smaller. That's the trick went out. However, though, that didn't really get poured out a whole bunch here. I would have actually, I need to plan better for water, simply because we weren't in the desert, but we did have that campground water supply issue that kind of got me nervous.
That made us think about a Sawyer squeeze,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
something that's lightweight, portable, that'll filter out the bad things, and that lots and lots of people are using. And they're not expensive. We just didn't think we had a need for it.
Right. Yeah. Some other things that were more camping related that I've thought about, you know, a saw, something to cut up wood, because you can make some firewood or campfires down there.
Yeah, that was one of the interesting things, actually. A lot of places that we go, historically, they wouldn't let you have a campfire.
Or at least wouldn't let you go through the woods and find wood,
Right.
forage for it.
Like, I'll tell you that we would have been happy to pay for firewood. I
Yeah.
mean, when it's cold, money wasn't really the issue. We were willing to. We would have paid $20 for a small
For a little-
bundle of firewood that was dry. That was another thing we kind of ran into was, you know, because it was wet and rainy, the firewood was wet.
Yeah.
But overall, we made it okay. We were able to get fires started. I mean, we were using our camp stoves to kind of help get the fire going at one point.
Pillow. I bought an inflatable pillow like you use. I tried some aircraft pillow. Terrible idea.
Couple reasons. It's not, you know, it doesn't hold up as, you know, you can't adjust it as much, or it's not as thick. But the second reason is portability.
Yeah, just.
I mean, you just can't beat those inflatable pillows from the perspective of they just collapse down to nothing.
Yeah, pack up.
But we did agree that it was the inflatable pillow. I felt like needed something around it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm going to have my wife make a pillowcase, or maybe find a pillowcase that I can put something inside with the inflatable pillow and cover it with a pillowcase. Because it's just, I don't know how to explain it.
If you're a side sleeper, you like this.
Exactly. Both of us are kind of side sleepers, and it felt a little bit too low. If you sleep on your back all the time, and I know people do that, but that's hard for us old guys sometimes.
Yeah.
Then you want something different. But any other gear changes? I broke my spoon, so I had to buy a different spoon.
Yeah. Still amazed at those little stoves. They're great.
Yeah, the stoves work
E-Tech
great.
City.
Yeah.
No, those things are compact. It's like, still think it's a marvel of science.
It's amazing what you can do with those, how quickly, and how long one of those small canisters really lasts.
Yeah.
We were out there for 5 days, and I bet you had a brand new canister.
Mm-hmm.
I bet you didn't even use half a canister.
Probably not.
For 5 days. So I think based on how we were eating and what we were eating and the kind of foods we were doing, we probably could have gone, 10 days
No longer, yeah.
on a fuel canister. And that's the little bitty tiny ones. And then when we bought one of the big ones just to have as a backup, because mine was about half empty when we left.
Yeah.
But
I did get a microfiber camp towel afterwards too, because they pack up a little better. The material's better. I just was trying to get by with like almost shop towel. That was, a little dry. I actually got some paracord to kind of make a clothesline. Not only do you need to dry some of your clothes, but sometimes you just need to, in the morning, to hang up your rain sheet, or the ground cloth or something, because it's just not going to dry. So while you're making your coffee, you hang some stuff up.
the tents worked out well. We didn't really have any major issues with the tents. Although, anytime you do this, you always start thinking a lighter weight tent that would be easier to fold up. One of the dilemmas with tents is always packing them back up, I think.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Overall, though, we had zero mechanical issues with the bikes. Right. Bikes did well. We didn't have any flats. Mm-hmm. The Schwalbe Marathon Plus Tour tires are just awesome. We didn't have any issues with those. Of course, we're riding on beautiful pavement, too, so that, I think, minimized it. That was clean.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of debris.
Despite the fact that there were storms going through. Yeah,
there wasn't a lot of debris. We didn't have any issues with that. So, overall, I felt like the bikes did well mechanically. We didn't have any major issues. Yeah. What it made us want to do is do more.
Yeah. So. But there's one other thing we didn't talk about yet, and that is the bikes themselves. We talked about wanting to do some more aggressive trails because this was fun, But you always kind of have a little wanderlust looking off into the woods, and you think, you just kind of want to go.
Yeah.
So we need maybe some bikes with bigger wheels, wider tires, a little more substantial frame.
Yeah, it's made us think about not really more gear, but just maybe changing up the gear just a little bit, changing up the bike just a little bit, and being able to do stuff that's a little more off that beaten path, because that's something we kind of have a sort of a desire to do. So it always makes you start looking at the next bike, and you can't put a price on your health.
That's right. That's right.
Anyway, well, I don't want to carry this on for too long, but that's kind of our review of the Trace, somewhat. At least the southern part of it that we saw, which was Jackson to Natchez and back. We did the round trip mentality because we didn't have a ride. We didn't get a ride. We wanted to kind of do that. So, and it worked out actually pretty well. We had camping locations along the way, campgrounds. So that's our review of the Natchez Trace and kind of how the tour went. I hope this was helpful for you guys, and maybe you'll find something here that was useful if you're going to do that tour, or maybe you're considering doing touring. But our systems worked out okay, and we're pretty happy with it. So thanks for watching. See you again soon.